We are in a world of opportunity to create experiences that delight customers more than ever before, to make split-second business decisions smarter, to deliver impact faster. At Microsoft Azure, we believe in the power of technology to drive limitless innovation and make your vision possible with a technology partner who has the experience and expertise you can trust.
Hi there, my name's Mark Finch. I am Mapping Team Lead at Grey Matter. Welcome today to our webinar around migrating to Azure Maps. Microsoft Mapping expert Clements will walk you through all the considerations you need to successfully migrate your existing system to Azure Maps. Enjoy the webinar.
Hello and welcome by this session about Bing Maps for Enterprise unification with Azure Maps. My name is Clemens Schotte. I'm the Program Manager for Azure Maps. If you're an existing Bing Maps for Enterprise customer, you probably have seen the email and notification about the unification process to Azure Maps. This session is about, actually for you, how do you migrate to Azure Maps. But first, a little bit of a comparison between Azure Maps and Bing Maps for Enterprise. A lot of things are pretty the same, of course, but there are also differences between Azure Maps and Bing Maps. The main part is how you buy or license the both mapping platforms. Azure Maps is part of Azure. You pay as you go. If you compare that to Bing Maps, basically you buy a license for a year or longer. On a technical scale, Azure Maps is using vector-based tiles. They are really smaller and are always really sharp if you zoom in and zoom out. Bing Maps is actually using raster or images as base tiles. And then if you're looking to compare that with the satellite imaging, that's actually exactly the same between Azure Maps and Bing Maps for Enterprise. The same thing for routing. If you're using truck routing or car routing in Bing Maps for Enterprise, the same thing can be done in Azure Maps. An additional benefit for Azure Maps is that we have also weather APIs that are not available in Bing Maps for Enterprise. And of course, one of the highlights, because Azure Maps is part of Azure, we are also doing all kinds of regulations and compliancy that is also applying to Azure Maps. So, for example, if you want to limit where your data is stored, you can definitely select, for example, the European Union or only in the US. That is a feature that is not available for Bing Maps. About security, if you're using Bing Maps, you always use a map key or Bing Maps key to access the APIs and also to show the map to the user. But then that that key is basically publicly shared. Maybe that is not always the best case if you want to hide that. For Azure Maps, you can exactly do the same thing. You can still use an Azure Maps key to access the APIs and render the map. But we have also some alternatives that are way more secure and more an enterprise type of accessing actually the data. So we support SaaS tokens and we have managed identities so that you can actually have short-lived tokens that only give you access to, for example, reading, and you cannot change anything. So it's basically way more protected than what you can do with the only key in Bing Maps for Enterprise. I already told you that we do compliancy. Because we are part of Azure, we have also an SLA, and we basically have regulations where we also comply with around the world, for example, with GDPR, for example. When you look to Azure Maps, it's rendered using WebGL, and WebGL is an HTML5 standard that is basically a web graphic library. What is basically WebGL stands for, and that means that it's using your GPU in your machine to render as quickly as possible the map, and that means that at least 60 frames per second the map will be updated when it needs to be updated. If you compare it to Bing Maps for Enterprise, that's basically using the HTML canvas method in HTML. That is a little bit slower actually, but it is more compatible with older browsers. But today actually all browsers will support WebGL, and that of course has also the benefit that you can use the web version of Azure Maps in mobile devices. So you don't need to have different code bases for mobile devices, maybe for Windows and for web, because it is all web-based using WebGL. You get all the performance of your device, and you only need one code base to create a mapping solution, versus Bing Maps basically had different SDKs for different platforms. Of course, for the developer, it's nice to have a native experience for a specific device. But when you create cross-device applications, then you also need and understand the capabilities of those different platforms better. When you're using Azure Maps, you only need to develop for web, and then it will basically work on all kinds of devices. And you can use basically a web view within your native application, so that the experience for the end user is still the same, and they don't experience that it is a web-based solution that's basically feels native to the end user. One of the last features where is a big difference actually between Azure Maps and Bing Maps for Enterprise is that if you have geospatial data and you want to store that somewhere, and you want to query that data, and maybe you want to do some other manipulations with that specific geospatial data, then we had in Bing Maps for Enterprise a services called Bing Spatial Data Services, or SDS for short. That was basically kind of database where you can put in your geospatial data, and then you can basically query that data, but also enrich some of the data with longitude and latitude information. That kind of services is not directly available in Azure Maps, because that is no need actually, because in Azure we have all kinds of different other databases available, from let's say Microsoft databases to open source databases, so you can basically choose what is the best data store for your solution. You can think about Cosmos DB or Azure SQL, PostgreSQL, all kind of databases are available. They all have geospatial capabilities in them. It really depends on the solution, what is best for your use case, I will say. Of course, when you're using one of the other services in Azure, there are also additional costs involved for that. So I will basically guide you to the documentation of those other products within Azure to see what the capabilities are and also what the costs are involved for those additional services. But if you want to migrate from the SDS service from Bing Maps, we actually have actually a starter template for you, and I explain a little bit later how to use that. So what is the timeline for our unification process? Actually, it's already started. So we already started for the last 1.5 years for in our backends, basically services to bring the Bing Maps for Enterprise capabilities and services to Azure Maps, so that we have one enterprise mapping solution for the way forward, and that is called Azure Maps. That also means that existing customers that are using Bing Maps for Enterprise need to do a migration to Azure Maps. Depending on the type of account or license what you have from Bing Maps, if you have the free or basic account, you have the time to do a migration until 2025, June 30th. But if that is too short, then you can also buy an enterprise license from Bing Maps, and then you have basically the time to 2028. But then the service will actually end. So you need to do a migration to Azure Maps before one of those dates. When you do a migration to Azure Maps, we have actually different APIs, and we have also different versions of those APIs. So we have version 1 APIs, and we have, I call them version 2 type of APIs. Basically, you don't see the version 2 API in the version number, it's basically in date. That's how Azure in general is working with APIs, is a date as a version number. So everything that is using the version 1 APIs, don't try to migrate to those because that also in the end have an end date. Please jump to the newer versions of the Azure Maps APIs so that we continue those for a way longer time than the version 1 APIs. There's no end date for the version 1 APIs, by the way, so if you need them, you can still use them. There's nothing bad in it. But if you can, and if the capabilities are needed for available in the version 2 APIs, I recommend definitely using them first. But that is basically how the migration timeline looks like. This has only to do with Bing Maps for Enterprise. It has nothing to do with the consumer version of Bing Maps. So the consumer version of Bing Maps will still exist. The whole branding of Bing Maps will still be available for all the consumers. I'm only talking about the Enterprise Mapping Suite that is basically changing his name and APIs to Azure Maps. So how do I migrate to Azure Maps when I'm using Bing Maps? So we have actually two ways how you can do a migration, depending on the scenario, of course. So if you have currently a website or a mobile version of Bing Maps, we have actually migration documents available. Of course, we have an SDK available or a web control that can be used as a map, and that is using WebGL, as what I already explained. So there is no native SDKs available for Azure Maps, but there is also no need for that because we are using WebGL that is fast enough for all kind of end user scenarios. We have also a sample website where you can find about 300 different samples, including the source code for all kind of scenarios from Azure Maps. So if you have, for example, a map with routing or with points on the map, and you want to migrate that to Azure Maps, you can actually just go to the sample website, take one of the samples or maybe combine two of samples, and then you already have the solution that looks really similar to what you already had in Bing Maps for Enterprise. If you are, for example, coming from SDS, Bing Maps SDS, most customers are basically using that for a store finder, store locator, a type of scenario, and of course it can be anything. So we basically have an Azure Maps locator sample. I will show you also that later on. That can be used as a starter template to create a store finder type of scenario. But it has everything has to do actually with the map itself, what you see on your screen. But you can also use the REST SDK, REST APIs from Bing Maps, and we have also something similar for Azure Maps. Of course, we have also migration documentation available for that, and we have native client libraries available for .NET, Python, Java, and JavaScript, or you can hard code it yourself if you prefer that. But the client libraries, of course, are easier to use as a developer. Not all the APIs are one-on-one the same or available in Azure Maps, but you don't need to look only to Azure Maps. You can actually look in the total suite of services and products what we have in Azure that can basically help you create the solution what you already had in Bing Maps for Enterprise. And the example there was, for example, storing data in Bing Maps. You don't store any data in Azure Maps actually, you store data in Azure, and that can be utilized by Azure Maps to show that to your user. So let me jump to my desktop so I can show you some of those websites. Oh. This is the website I want to show you. So this is the documentation website from Azure Maps, where you can actually find all the information what you need as a developer to get you started actually. But the thing what I want to highlight is our migration document. So under the how-to guide, we have a migration from Bing Maps documentation available, but we have also migration documents from other mapping products that you can also utilize. So what I already told you is that you can migrate from the REST APIs, or you can use a migration from a website or mobile device. So I can basically click on the overview page where I basically explain a little bit what Azure Maps has, but also what are the different names of the different services. So here you see a table of what Bing Maps for Enterprise kind of APIs or services was called and how we now call it in Azure Maps. For example, if you're talking about the auto-suggest or autocomplete functionality in Bing Maps, we have something similar in Azure Maps called Fuzzy Search with the type ahead feature that needs to be enabled there, and then you have the same type of functionality. For example, when you do geocoding, you can do that of course also with Bing Maps, but then you basically need to set up a complete workflow with the SDS component for batch geocoding. And in Azure Maps it's way easier to use actually. You just call or batch a geocoder or forward geocoding or reverse geocoding depending on the scenario. And then you can do that also in batch form if that is needed. There are a lot of things similar, for example with car and truck routing that is still also available in Azure Maps. So there are still things that are still possible in Azure Maps. And of course we have other services in Azure Maps that are not available in Bing Maps. That is not in this list, but the weather APIs is a good example of that. Then you can actually go to the different APIs for what you want to do for a migration. And then you, for example, if I want to learn a little bit more about routing, then you can basically click on the documentation here, and then we actually explain what are the differences are, how to set up things, what are the parameters and what you need to do with them. So there is a lot of information available online, but maybe documentation is not your preferred starting point for a migration, because if you have a simple scenario, it's probably easier to go to our sample website. Then you browse to the samples, you see all kinds of capabilities what we have in Azure Maps. But if I, for example, have just a bubble layer on top of a map, I can run that sample. I can see if that is something is similar what I'm actually have in my current scenario, and if I like this scenario and it is behaving in the way that what you prefer, then you can actually also go to the source code of this sample, and then basically it's just copy and paste and change small stuff in the sample, and then your solution is already there. If the solution is a little bit more complex than just a sample, for example, you have a store finder, or a locator finder scenario, we actually have a starter template created. It is focusing on a store locator, but you can use it for any type of location finding scenario. So it can also be saying, I want to find not only stores, but maybe I want to find an EV charging station. Then is that potentially also a starter template for you. So what do you get if you're using this Azure Maps Store Locator starter template? Is not only the infrastructure, but you get also a public website where the store finder functionality is what you now see in this animation. but you get also an backend or administrative page where you can maintain all your stores. So you don't need to upload Excel sheets and maybe edit them offline, but you have a complete online scenario what can be used, including the whole administrative part of your locations in this case. So when you look to the store finder, you basically get a search bar that is searching not only on locations but also to the name of the stores. You can use the current location of the user, but you can also use your voice. So if you don't want to type, you can actually speak to the search bar, and it will also search using your voice. And it's not visible in this animation, but we have also a filter capability. That is actually this last button. If you click on the filter, then you can basically say, give me all the stores with parameter X, Y, Z, and then it will be filtered for. So if you want to search deeper than only the name, then you can also filter on that. So there are many features. If you want to set this up, it's really easy. Actually, you only need to execute one command. This is this command what you can execute in your Azure subscription, and then it will generate actually this type of architecture for you. So it will create a web server, and it also creates a Cosmos DB for storing the locations. It also has a front end what can be used for the end users, including the administrative page where you can maintain the stores. Of course, there's more documentation available if you want to go a little bit deeper how things are working, but to get started in 5 minutes is just execute this command line in PowerShell, and then it will create the whole solution for you in just 5 minutes, and you can start using it and change the look and feel for what you need. I was also talking about our client libraries. So we have client libraries available for .NET, for Python, for Java and JavaScript. Here I show you an example of the Python client library to access Azure Maps APIs. The documentation actually explains how to set things up, but it is really simple because in Python you just do a pip install, and then you can already use, for example, the search API in this example. You need, of course, a subscription key, an Azure Maps subscription key. So that is not the same thing what you had in Bing Maps for Enterprise. There you had also a subscription key. So they are not compatible with each other. So you need to create a new one in the Azure portal. I will show you later on how to do that. And then you use that subscription key actually to access in your code or in your website. When you're talking about the web SDK or the web control for Azure Maps, we actually have 2 ways to utilize them. So you can use them using an npm package. So it's basically a package but you can install to use Azure Maps in your client solution website. But maybe it's a little bit overkill for you. What you can also do is actually use our CDN endpoints. So our CDN endpoints actually only needs 2 lines of scripts. The first one is a style sheet and the second one is actually the JavaScript library for our map control. So that is also what you can embed into your website or web application to utilize and use Azure Maps. Let's jump actually back to my slides. So I talked about all the topics here. Yeah, let's continue to the next slide. So how do I start using Azure Maps? The first thing what you need is actually an Azure subscription. You can create or access an Azure subscription for free. So you need to actually create, sign up yourself to an Azure subscription, and you can do that yourself by going to azuremaps.com, or you can actually go to your local reseller. For example, Grey Matter is a great partner from us that can help you get access to an Azure subscription that basically holds an Azure Maps account. So what do you do when you have an Azure subscription is actually create a resource group. A resource group is just, let's call it a folder where you can put in resources. And one of the resources that you can put in a resource group is an Azure Maps account or Azure Maps resource. When you have done that, then you get all the benefits, all the services, all the capabilities of Azure Maps from that specific resource what you have created. So that is in the backend. When you have the resource, then you can actually use that Azure Maps resource or account in your website. So basically you have a subscription key and you utilize that same thing with the Azure Maps control, and then it can be rendering a map on your website or in your mobile application if you want. Or if you don't need a website or don't need a map actually, you can also use the REST SDKs directly. So if you have a background process, let's say you want to do geocoding, transforming an address to a longitude to latitude information, and maybe you want to do that in batch because you have a huge database of addresses what you want to do geocoding on, then you can also utilize that with one of our REST SDKs. And the third option is actually using a third-party control. So you can use, for example, the open source leaflet, or you can maybe use Cesium as a map control. So we are allowing that you use third-party map libraries or controls using the Azure Maps services. So you can choose what you want to use Azure Maps on. So let me jump actually to my desktop again and show you how to set up an Azure subscription, and then we actually set up an Azure Maps account in that. Let me go to my desktop, and then we were here. So the first thing what to do is you can go to azure.com or azure.microsoft.com, it's the same site, and there you can sign up for a free account. So get started with Azure. Then you can basically say, I want to have a trial version to try Azure yourself. Then you fill in your details. If you already have an Azure subscription at your company, then basically you can request access to that subscription, or you can go to our local partners to also get support from them, and maybe they have also additional services around Azure and to help you support maybe by the migration. So when you have set up an Azure account and have an Azure subscription actually, then you actually can go to the Azure portal, and the Azure portal is something that looks like this. In the Azure portal you can create all kinds of Azure services that you can utilize in your solution, but in this case we are only interested in Azure Maps. So let's create a new resource. We go to search for Azure Maps, and then you see that we can create an Azure Maps resource. So we have a subscription. I need to have a resource group. I'm going to create a new one. Let's call it demo. Then we give it a name. The name is not really important for how you utilize Azure Maps, but it's more for your own administrative things that you know where you're going to use it for. So I still call it demo. Then I can select a region where the Azure Maps resource is actually proficient, but it is not really true what I'm now saying. Actually, Azure Maps is always proficient worldwide, so it's a global Azure services. The only reason why you need to select a region that has to do with actually our billing engine. So to be compliant with GDPR, for example, you need to say that all data needs to be stored in that specific region. So if I'm saying that I'm in West Europe, all my billing information will be stored in West Europe, and no API calls will go to the US. That is basically not allowed by those regulations. But so By selecting this, is still Azure Maps is available worldwide, except in China, in South Korea, by the way. But for the rest of the world, Azure Maps is accessible. But only the data that is stored for billing purposes, that is stored in West Europe. The pricing tier you cannot change, it's just Gen 2 pricing, and then of course you need to accept the terms, and then you can basically review and create the resource. So that takes a couple of seconds to create the resource. When you have the resource, it will still not cost you anything, because you're only going to pay for the resource when you're going to use it. So if you don't call APIs to Azure Maps, then you don't consume anything, so you don't pay for anything. And I explain a little bit later in this presentation about pricing, but we have also a free tier for pricing, so you get basically free transactions every month what you can utilize. So if you have just for development purposes and you stay below the free tier, you can use Azure Maps actually for free. So the resource is now created, so I go to the Azure Maps resource I just created. There are a couple of things that maybe are important in this resource what I just had created. One of the things, of course, is how do I get the subscription key or the Azure Maps key? Let's go to authentication, and there you can basically find the primary key. That is something that you can copy and use in your source code in your client libraries or in the web control to access the Azure Maps resources. Another thing what you can do is, of course, use managed identities to maybe not use a primary key, because when I use that primary key and I share that with external customers, maybe not the best thing to do. So for proof of concept and development purposes, I will say using a Azure Maps key is fine, but everything in production, try not to do it actually. If you have support issues or maybe there are things not working correctly, you can also create a support ticket. So here on the bottom of the page, you can basically click on support and you can create an Azure Maps support ticket. We have a dedicated support team available that can help you by development type of technical issues with Azure Maps, of course. Another thing that can be interesting, of course, it will be empty right now, is that you can basically monitor the usage of Azure Maps. So we have all kinds of graphs and that you can see what how do you use actually Azure Maps, where do you pay for in the end. That is also available from the Azure portal. So that is how to set up and getting an Azure Maps key for what you can use in your source code. Let's jump back to the slides, and they are here. Yes. Here I show you a little bit of HTML, or maybe I need to say a little bit of JavaScript code, how to set up an Azure Maps map on your website. I told you in the beginning that you basically only need to link two files from Azure Maps from our CDN endpoint. So that is using the Maps control JavaScript code for Azure Maps, and it is using version 3 of our control. So if you specify only the 3, then you get always the latest version of version 3. So we basically update on a monthly basis, adding new features to the Azure Maps control. Then that version number you don't need to change. If you stay on 3, you will always get the latest version of version 3. Then looking to the source code itself, basically you create an atlas map, that is just Azure Maps in this case, where you give a longitude latitude information and a zoom version of the zoom number of the level of zoom for the map. The longitude and latitude information is, however, reversed compared to Bing Maps. So that's the only thing where you need to remember if you have longitude and latitude information in Bing Maps versus Azure Maps, is that we actually following the industry standard in Azure Maps. In Bing Maps for Enterprise, that was not the case. So in Azure Maps, basically we're following the industry standard. And that's why it is basically reversed maybe from what you're very used to in Bing Maps. Of course, you also need the subscription key. You now know how to get the subscription key. So when you have basically set up the map by pointing it to a specific point on the map and a specific zoom level and your subscription key, basically there will be an event when the map is ready to draw on or maybe add your data on top of the map. Then you have basically a ready event of the map, and there you can do all your things what you want to do on the map. If you look to the samples I showed you earlier, there you can also see how to basically it's following the same structure how to set up the map. In this short demo, we have a data source. We add the data source to the map. The data source is in this scenario completely empty, so it will not show you anything. But when you add data to the data source, it automatically shows you that on the map. So it's really easy to use. So you have a couple of lines of code. What you need only include 2 lines of code or CDN endpoints for the map control. And basically you have 2 functions. The first one is creating the map, and the second one is waiting for the map is ready, and then you can do your stuff. Now, subscription key, I showed you how to get that. That is basically the whole architecture what you see here. So you have your Azure subscription with your resource group and an Azure Maps account. Then you have your Azure Maps key and use that in our Azure Maps web control. But the Azure Maps web control is publicly available, and your key also, so maybe not the best thing to do. So what we can do actually is use a different architecture, and it is basically using managed identities, but you can also do something similar with SaaS tokens, but it's a little bit more maintenance, I will say. So managed identity is the way forward, I will say, because you don't need to maintain anything at your site. We do that for you. The benefit also is that you have a higher security level because you have short-lived tokens that basically if you can if you take that short-lived token and want to utilize that, then the time is already expired, so it basically makes no sense to steal them. And of course the tokens have restrictions in what they can do. You can say that they, for example, have only data reader rights, so that the token cannot update or change anything in Azure Maps. And if you're using the normal subscription key, you basically have the highest possible rights for the specific key. And with the token way of doing things, you can basically specify the lowest rights what you need for your situation. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult to set up, but we actually have documentation available, and I actually have written a blog post including all the steps what you need to do to create this architecture and create this more secure scenario so that your key is not basically publicly available. And then I want to talk a little bit about pricing, because that is of course also different between Bing Maps for Enterprise and Azure Maps. In Azure Maps it's pay for what you use. If you don't use anything, you don't pay for anything. You don't have any upfront costs. Billing is however on a monthly basis compared to Bing Maps what is more on a yearly basis. In Bing Maps you basically buy transactions for a whole year. If you don't use them, you basically pay too much, I will say, because they are gone. For Azure Maps you only pay for the things what you have used, and of course we give you free transactions every month. So if you go to the pricing table, there you can see actually how much transactions you get for free. So we have a pricing calculator available for you to make it a little bit easier to understand how many transactions, basically what the cost will be involved for that. And an API call is not the same thing as a transaction. So it can be that you have multiple API calls, but it will still call as one transaction. I give you a simple example is if you have the map visible to the user, it is using, of course, tiles, base map tiles or vector tiles actually to render the map, and you get basically 15 tile requests, but it will cost you only one transaction. So every transaction gives you basically 15 tiles, and you can use them as a user, so that if you zoom in or move the map a little bit, it's still in that limit of 15 tiles most of the time. So there we have also documentation available. If you somehow also using Azure Maps in Power BI, you don't need to pay or have any Azure Maps pricing coming to you, because in Power BI, Azure Maps is already included in the license. So there, basically, you don't pay additional for Azure Maps. So the whole story, what I just was talking about, has all to do for the developer version of Azure Maps, where you have basically all the features and all the capabilities. If you're using Power BI, of course, you are have a lot of features that are built into Power BI, but that of course does not mean that you have all the capabilities of Azure Maps. Then the last slide is more about monitoring. So you have way more control about how Azure Maps is actually utilized in your solution. So we have all kinds of cost management options, including alerts, or you can even set a cap on a specific resource group even, where you can spend over that limit. That's really great when you have a developer team and you want to, and there's sometimes you make a mistake and you do a lot of geocoding as a tryout, but it can be costly in the end. So you can basically add a cap on your developer Azure Maps subscription, and for production maybe the cap is higher or is not needed there. So with the Microsoft cost management capabilities built in Azure, you can do way more control than what you were possible to do in Bing Maps for Enterprise. Now the last slide is more links where you get started. So go to azuremaps.com to learn about the capabilities. Go to the documentation website if you want to learn more about the details and how to utilize the APIs. Also the migration documents for Bing Maps for Enterprise are available on our documentation website. I will say the sample website will be your best friend, because that is just copy and paste and combine some of the samples to get your end solution. So there you get really quickly up to speed, I will say. And if you want to follow what is new in Azure Maps or want to learn a little bit about some of the other scenarios, then we have also a blog what we write, and there you can basically learn a little bit of the background. So that is basically everything what I want to talk about for this session. If you have questions, you can put them in the comments or in the chat. We try to answer them as quick as we can. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you have a good experience by migrating from Bing Maps to Azure Maps. So I wish you good luck with the efforts that is needed for that, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning into this webinar. I hope you found it useful and feel enabled now to start using Azure Maps. No one knows mapping like grey matter, and we have an entire team to help you with your mapping needs. I've put our contact information on the screen, and feel free to contact us via email or give us a call. Bye.